Hello and welcome to another episode of Pages to Progress. We are in the book Generous Justice by Timothy Keller. You're very welcome to join us on the journey. We've reached chapter, is it 4, guys?
4, Justice in Your Neighbor.
Right, chapter 4. As usual, joined with Dee and John as we're in conversation. We want to invite you on into the conversation. You can jump online to eastsidesda.org/pages to progress, and you'll be able to see all the episodes that we've been having. We're going to be discussing a short chapter today, but a very pertinent chapter in relation to the conversation on justice. A very well-known parable to most of us if we've been brought up on children's stories, and you probably heard 1,001 sermons on this particular parable. But this is Timothy Keller's take on the parable, and we're going to discuss a few things. So how about we dive straight in? I'll kick the ball rolling on page 64. Something really kind of punched out to me. I'm going to read the bottom of page 64 where Keller says this: do you meet the needs of your neighbor with all the joy, energy, and fastidiousness with which you meet your own needs? And that really punched me hard. Bit of context to the quote. So Keller retells the story of how the Pharisees were so zealous on tithing on their mint and dill, and even down to the last details of everything, single spice in their cabinet. They would give 1/10 of that over to God. And yet they were so detailed in their holy aspects of spiritual living, they somehow missed the mark by not being as detailed in trying to help others. It's almost like tithing on the mint and the dill was meeting their own spiritual needs and securing their own salvation, yet it did not even factor into their minds that part of living a life as a saved individual means that you actually live a life in service to others, like the poor and the needy. That was something that really struck out to me. It also, I'll say this, and then I'll be quiet because I think I'm talking too much at the beginning. I'll say this: it highlighted the ridiculousness of trying to set ourselves with such high moral, spiritual standards that we almost cannot even just level the same physical standards of helping others at the same time. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, if I hold such a huge standard in terms of my own spirituality, God expects the same when it comes to actually meeting the needs of others. And I have to be honest and say, I'm not sure that I rise up to that challenge. And it almost presents that kind of approach to the gospel as a bit ridiculous. Those are my thoughts. What do you guys think as I kick this off?
So I think that's interesting because in a lot of ways, the Pharisaical way of doing things was by the book, following the rules, following the regulations. And if I think I'm hearing you right, and correct me if I'm wrong, I mean, they're setting a standard for themselves that can't be reached. But in a lot of ways, it's a very clean and self-imposed standard that they can achieve because they're able to, because they know the rules and regulations. And I think Jesus' story, the Good Samaritan, is telling us maybe we need to get a little bit more dirty with what we do and a little bit more practical. And I guess the example, I was reading another book that was talking about a drowning person doesn't need someone to come by and tell them how to swim or chastise them for not learning to swim earlier.
We'll take a picture.
Need someone. What's that?
We'll take a picture.
Yeah. Take pictures and post it. They need someone to actually jump in the water and get wet, right, and help them.
Right.
And I think Christianity's gotten away from that a lot of the times. I shouldn't say Christianity, maybe religion, established religion that gets into the rules and regulations. So should I say even maybe salvation by works, although it's a different kind of works maybe. But I don't know. That's what I was thinking about when you were talking about what the Pharisees were doing as far as tithing their everything down to the minutia.
Well, the priests and the Levites and who were on the road meeting the Samaritan and meeting the Jewish person who was beaten up. Technically, they were on their way to church. They were on their way to fulfill the law, the policies there. And, you know, I just thought about it in terms of myself. Imagine something like that were to happen to me, and I'm on my way to Eastside to preach on Sabbath, as I am planning to preach on Sabbath, and I can either get held up by helping someone, apologize to Eastside, I'm sorry guys, I guess I won't be preaching today because this happened. I wonder if that would be acceptable to the congregation at large.
I didn't make it to church because I had to stop on the 405 to help someone change their tire.
And the argument is many a times when I've seen that happen is, oh, someone else will stop.
Yeah. I think we all do that to some degree.
Or it's, oh, I wish I could stop. I just have to get to. If it was any other day, I would stop.
So on page 65, Keller, that first paragraph, second sentence, I think speaks to this. Well, even the first sentence, you know, this was, of course, an impossibly high standard, but that was the point in a lot of ways. I mean, Jesus was almost mocking their standard, I guess. And then the next sentence says that Jesus was showing the man the perfect righteousness, the law demanded.
Okay, I think we're losing
so that
John.
He could see that he was ultimately powerless.
Okay, I think we're losing John a little bit. I've muted him. Hopefully he'll be able to.
Okay, just myself. Can you hear me now?
Yes. Yeah, we can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you now. All right, sorry. So for those who are listening and you heard a little bit of space music going on, we're going to carry on. I think you were reading, Jesus was showing the man the perfect righteousness the law demanded so that he could see that he was ultimately powerless to fulfill it.
Exactly.
Was there anything else you were reading apart from that?
No, that's the sentence that I think kind of answers that question. I mean, we set these standards for ourselves, but it doesn't matter what standard we set. It's never going to be good enough to save ourselves. And that's the fallacy with salvation by works.
Right, definitely. Dee, did anything strike out to you in this chapter as we were reading?
In this section that we were just talking about?
Not necessarily, just in the chapter. Did anything strike out to you?
I think there is that continuation of that idea that, you know, as you experience God's grace, right, that you are going to turn around and be able to demonstrate that same grace to other people.
Right.
So I guess, I mean, does that automatically lead to the question of then, if you're not, say, you know, doing certain things to relieve suffering or whatever, does that mean that you just haven't experienced enough of God's grace?
That's a brilliant question.
You know, like we just said, you know, often, you know, we see somebody on the road with a car trouble and we pass by, and honestly, a lot of my thought is these days is more like, it's been for many years, it's like, wow, we all have cell phones, we all can call for help, and that's one of the biggest, really, actually, it is the deterrent reason why I don't stop, because that's just, we're all capable now of, you know what I mean? We have these technologies. I mean, but I'm sure there are people who don't have that and who may appear to be more in need, right? So yeah, so then my question as I'm reading this chapter is, you know, because the chapter sounded like to me that one, we need to do everything that we can to get people out of poverty. And two, there is no limit. And the only limit is how we are going to we need to treat others as we'll be treating ourselves the same, you know? And so,
if
and
you
to
don't
be
mind, Dee, I want to focus
yeah.
on the first question because it was a really good and powerful question. If I was to try and put it into different words,
yes.
does it mean that we haven't experienced God's grace if we are not actively participants in helping bring relief to people in need? Or I'm going to quote you and quote Keller, getting rid of poverty. And I think that's an excellent question. I think I'm challenged by that question on so many different levels. I think a partial answer to your question, I don't know if you agree with me or not, John, is yes. There is an aspect of God's grace which hasn't yet taken root in my heart for me to fully be acting out in a way that a saved person should be acting out. Because we all know that this isn't stuff to do to be saved.
Right.
This is the natural response of what a fully transformed person who has been in a saved relationship will now live their life in some fashion or form. And I guess for me, that to me, as we use this big word that we constantly work through called sanctification, it is the transforming ever state of an individual from selfishness to generosity.
It's a process.
Right. And so for me, it's a partial yes to have we not fully experienced the grace of God? Because every day I unlock a new chapter about what grace means to me. And I don't know if that makes any sense.
No, I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I think it's a very much a process that comes about as part of your relationship with Jesus Christ. And that growing relationship will not only grow your faith and your trust in him,
right,
but I think it'll also grow the love you have for others. And then grace kind of helps to amplify that in a lot of ways. And it kind of keeps you pushing you forward and then covers up all the little missteps we make because we live in a world of sin.
Right. And I think one of the illuminations which you brought out, Dee, which Keller really was kind of hit home of, many a times we try to give some cash to someone in need. But Keller here is advocating for the eradication of poverty, which is, let's talk about it within the context of a church. Let's just say if Eastside decided to make a charge to eradicate poverty here in our locality, would that be a ridiculous goal?
I don't think the word is ridiculous, but I'm not.
I think your hesitation is echoes exactly what we all kind of feel in response to a question like that.
Yeah, so let me weigh in.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think the answer to your question is no, it would not be ridiculous. And another example, if you wanted to look at a worldwide example, is worldwide hunger. There is no question that there's enough food made and available so that no one would ever have to starve to death.
Right.
But the problem is, in a world of sin, people's thirst for power,
right,
their greed, and all that other stuff gets in the way and people end up starving. And so, no, it's not ridiculous that within our own community, a church the size of Eastside, with the members, some more affluent, some less, couldn't eradicate poverty. But the next question is, how much are they willing to give up to do that? And I think Keller touches on that to some degree.
Because I think my question implies the great cost that it would come to the East Side members. And just to try and present the different kinds of costs. Yes, there is the cost of inconvenience. There is the cost of safety, but there are other costs as well, as Keller talked about. For instance, bringing people out of poverty who don't always know how to make responsible decisions with resources. And Keller talked about that in terms of the fact that, for instance, I think one of his key examples here is a single mother who has some children, and the church gave them some money, and she went and took them out into a restaurant and bought, what is it, a bike and stuff, and a few other stuff here and there. Like,
oh yeah, all kinds of stuff for her kids, taking her kids out to eat, and everyone's mad at her because she's being irresponsible.
And I wondered to myself, is that the cost? Is that part of the cost of eradicating poverty from that woman's life? Keller seems to argue, yes, it is.
And his argument's based on Christ meeting us where we are, and us not being any more worthy than that woman or anyone else.
Right.
And him coming from where he is to help us no matter what. I mean, and ultimately, the ultimate cost was giving up his life to save us from sin, for the ultimate reward for us that we don't deserve at all.
And I think that's why you may not have said anything, Dee, but that's why I resonated with your hesitation, because it makes me feel uncomfortable.
I mean, it all sounds great. I'm not in disagreement with it. It just practically speaking, that's where my head is at. Like, how does this all work out?
Let me ask you this question.
Am I lacking, I mean, obviously, the idea that if you need to fully trust God and just get into it and do it is obvious. I think the obvious answer. I mean, in my heart, that's what the answer is. But still, there's a part of it's like, how? Throughout this whole book, it's like, how?
Right. And I think that's a general frustration that applies to everyone in every single context, because the how is different in Kirkland than it is different in London, than it is different in, I don't know, some remote village in Somalia. It's the how is a long, arduous walk with those who are suffering. It can only really come from there. Because and case in point, it was the long, arduous, we're going to give this single mother money. Oh, wow, she went and spent and took her kids out to restaurants and bought her bikes. Now we're going to reconvene. And immediately the knee-jerk reaction is, we can't give her any more money. Instead of actually including what just happened as part of the narrative to come out of poverty. And I think where Keller challenges us is understanding that before we even work on hows, are we as committed to this as we think that we are?
Yeah, so in some ways, Keller answers the question, how? I mean, on page 67, the last sentence of the middle paragraph, he says that Jesus meant us to be sacrificially involved with the vulnerable, just as the Samaritan risked his life by stopping on the road. I mean, I think ultimately it ends up being somewhat of a risky proposition. I mean, the elders in that church with this woman risked their financial resources. And I don't know, are you going to touch on the end of that story at some point?
Yeah, at the end, we can do.
Because
actually, go on. You can mention it. Go for it.
Yeah, I mean, because the financial resources were at stake, and they weren't happy with how they were spent. But when they put in the time, they were able to start a conversation and develop a relationship
to find out why this woman actually took her kids out to the restaurant and bought bikes and stuff.
And then all of a sudden, everyone's like, "Well, yeah, I mean, why not?"
Right. And for those who are listening, just to briefly let you know, some of the major reasons why the woman did do that, and why when they carried on digging to find out why she bought bikes, why she took them to the restaurant, is because she felt so much insecurity for not giving her kids a normal life, that she just wanted to give them a taste of a little bit of normalcy. and it wasn't just a frivolous expenditure, but there was context to it. And it doesn't justify the fact that something wrong was happened. It just means there is always a narrative and a context behind poverty, behind the mentality of poverty. I've heard it said before by a few people, some homeless people don't actually want to get out of homelessness. Some people are just stuck in that mentality. There's nothing you can do for them. I think Keller, and I would actually say Jesus, proposes throughout the New Testament, no, there is always something you can do for those on that end of the scale. Definitely a very challenging read in some respects. There was one thing that I did want to bring out. Actually, I think, John, you also wanted to bring out about the Great Samaritan, which was quite powerful. Let me hand over to you, John. You're on mute, by the way, John.
That's the part I was just totally blown away with in this chapter. And Jesus was masterful in telling stories. And I mean, at the very beginning of the chapter, the question was, what must I do to inherit eternal life? And Jesus's response was, what is written in the law? And so he immediately starts a conversation. But I think the flip side to the parables is that they are ageless in a lot of ways, because they're talking about the old Jewish law, but it's the same law that was in the Old Testament, honestly. And it's the same law in the New Testament that we apply to now. And Jesus took, so the part that blew me away was this last section on page 75, the Great Samaritan. And Jesus put himself, well, Keller puts Jesus in this parable as the Samaritan that comes down to this world from his powerful and glorified state as the God of the universe. He assumes the form of man and becomes the Samaritan to us as the beat up in this world of sin, Jewish person laying on the side of the road, dying. And Jesus saves us from that. And he goes above and beyond. He saves us and he takes care of us, and seeing us through the whole process of getting whole again. And then ultimately, Jesus paid the ultimate price and plans to take us home. So it's not a saved as in a one and done, which I think you could say the Samaritan did a lot for the Jew in the parable,
right?
But it's the process. Every hour, every day, every week, every month, Jesus is saving us from our situation on the side of the road that we're stuck in this world right now.
That's really powerful. I think the consistency of how God brings us out of spiritual poverty to make us spiritually rich is something that he invests in us on a daily basis, even though we start off on the back end. And actually, that's something that's quite evident with the Samaritan in the real story. Well, the real parable, should I say, is that he promises to pay the innkeeper, and he says to him, if there's any more that the cost amounts to, I'm coming back and I will pay everything for you. And that speaks to the consistency of bringing someone out of a somewhat so-called permanent ill condition and bringing them into somewhat a permanent healthy condition of power and greatness. So yeah, I resonate with that.
I mean, what it reminded me of, honestly, was one of your first sermons was What If, based on the parable of the prodigal son. And it just flipped it upside down for me, because the premise of that is, what if the elder son at the end of the story, instead of being unhappy with how everything went, realized how sad the father was and how bad off the younger son was going to be, and went after the younger son and was the one that actually brought the younger son back to the father. I mean, that just, boom, blew me away. The same parable in a whole new context. And I think Keller did the same thing for me in this parable.
Yes.
And then it made me think, there's different parables and there's different reasons for parables, but what other parables are we missing because we're only looking at them on the surface.
Right.
And when we put Jesus as the center of it, all of a sudden there's a depth to it that's just powerful, and, you know, powerful beyond words in my mind.
Yes. And maybe parables are the way that Jesus is trying to say things just with a bit of coy kind of play on words every now and again. Dee, is there anything else that jumped out at you, or maybe you just want to respond to what we're talking about?
No, not really. I mean, just, you know, absolutely. I believe, and I've always thought that, you know, our neighbor is everyone. There is no, you know, barrier as just because based on race or someone's culture or color or, you know, their status. None of that. Is everyone's our neighbor. And truly, you know, treating everyone as we want to be treated is the that's the only way to go. I mean, there's no other way, right? Yeah.
I think, if you don't mind me saying, Dee, I think you are, as well as all of us, are still struggling deeply with the how of of these conversations.
Yeah.
And I think that it's healthy that we are actually in a place where we are discussing and trying to get through and work out what the how is, because God is using these books, the sermons, the ministry of Eastside. God is using this space in order to speak a how into our existence, providing that we are willing to listen. I think also, because I'm with you 100%, I'm impatient and I want the how now. Because I want the marching orders. Tell us where to go, what to do, how much money we need to put in, which people who need to put in positions, and what their job descriptions are. Go. That's what I would prefer. But I think one of this frustration highlights to me the necessity of God wanting us to, and I'm going to use this as an analogy, to finish the book. Because on the other side of this journey, we will have all the tools, and there is a danger of going into a mission field with half the tools that are required.
Right.
And I just want to acknowledge your uncomfortableness with the how as something that I'm also experiencing, and I think a number of us in Eastside are also experiencing, given everything that is taking place right now. And I'm not even going to say to you, be comfortable. I'm just going to say, just continue to be uncomfortable.
I think the discomfort in this opens us up to the Spirit and the Spirit's leading. And it's not a bad thing. It does leave you kind of wondering what to do.
Right.
But chapter 6 is titled, How Should We Do Justice?
Did you cheat?
I did cheat.
No, I haven't read it yet.
Did you cheat?
Chapter 5 is next time, and it's Why Should We Do Justice? Chapter 6 is How Should We Do Justice?
I was trying to hint at something. Well, I think that this book is definitely challenging us on various different levels. We want to invite you all, please, if you're watching this video, you can join the journey too. Jump online to eastsidesda.org/pages to progress. We're reading the book Generous Justice by Timothy Keller. And we want to invite you on this journey. It's still not too late. You can jump onto Amazon. You can get this book within a few days, and you can start reading with us. Next week, we will be reading the next chapter, which is chapter 5.
5.
Chapter 5. And it is, as John rightly said, entitled, How Should We Do Justice?
No, it's Why.
No, why?
Oh, sorry, Why?
Chapter 5 is Why. Chapter 6 is How.
You see, I'm jumping ahead because you got me all
still got to
messed
be
up.
patient a little.
Thanks, John. Thanks, John, for that. All right, guys. We're blessed that you could join us here with this chapter, and we hope to see you next week for another episode. But until then, happy reading. God bless and stay safe. Bye.